Alexandria, a gateway to knowledge, stories, and imagination, a digital library without limits, always open, always growing. Subscribe, like, and be part of the journey of discovery.
Chapter 1: Rulers Without Thrones. When news of Alexander's death spread, the immediate question on everyone's mind was about his successor. At the time of his death, Alexander had no clear heir. He didn't have a child, but his wife Roxana was pregnant, and a few months after his death, she gave birth to a son. Roxana was the daughter of an Asian prince. Alexander had captured her along with other women at a fortress where her father had hidden them for safety. Roxana was incredibly beautiful, and Alexander decided to marry her. Out of all the captives from his campaigns, Roxana was said to be the most stunning. Since Alexander had died only about 4 years after their marriage, Roxana was still young and beautiful when their son was born. Besides this newborn son, there was also Alexander's half-brother, Aridaeus, who was alive when Alexander died. Aridaeus had a more direct claim to the throne, but he was mentally impaired and had no real political influence other than being the next in line by birth. He wasn't Olympias' son, his mother was another woman, and it was rumored that his mental disability was caused by Olympias' attempt to poison him out of jealousy. She was angry because Philip had left her for Aridaeus' mother. The poison damaged Aridaeus' mind, though it didn't kill him. When Alexander became king, he took steps to protect Aridaeus from any further harm by Olympias, and even brought him along on his campaign in Asia. Both Aridaeus and Roxana were in Babylon when Alexander died. When it came to the question of who should inherit the Macedonian crown, Aridaeus, Alexander's half-brother, or Roxana's newborn son, it was clear that neither could truly rule. Alexander's son was too young, and Aridaeus was mentally unfit to lead. As a result, the real power fell into the hands of Alexander's top generals and advisors. After discussing the situation, these generals decided not to choose between the two potential heirs. Instead, they named both as joint rulers. They called Aridaeus Philip and Roxana's baby Alexander. These two became the official kings, but in reality, the generals divided the power among themselves. In this division, Egypt and the surrounding African territories were given to Ptolemy, a prominent general. He went on to establish the Ptolemaic dynasty, a line of rulers that would later include the famous Cleopatra. Macedon and Greece, along with the European provinces, were assigned to Antipater and Craterus. Craterus, who was already on his way back to Macedon with a group of soldiers Alexander had sent home, was in poor health at the time. Because of his condition, Alexander had sent another officer, Polysperchon, to assist Craterus in leading the troops. Polysperchon would later play a significant role in the events that unfolded in Macedon once he and Craterus arrived. In addition to the major provinces of Egypt in Africa and Macedon and Greece in Europe, several smaller regions in Asia Minor and Syria were also divided among Alexander's generals and ministers after his death. Each of them wanted their share of power. The division of these territories initially satisfied most people. It was officially done in the name of King Philip Aridaeus, but the real person in charge was Perdiccas, Alexander's top general at the time of his death. When Alexander died, Perdiccas immediately took control of the army and began managing the empire. Many believed he had ambitions to become emperor himself, replacing Alexander. At first, Perdiccas pushed for Roxana's unborn child to be the sole heir, excluding Aridaeus. His goal was likely to rule as regent while the child was young, eventually taking control of the entire empire. However, the other generals disagreed and wanted Aridaeus to be king. This disagreement caused a major conflict, and for several days it seemed like civil war was about to break out in Babylon. Eventually, a compromise was reached. Both Aridaeus and Roxana's child would share the throne, and Perdiccas would act as regent in Babylon. When the empire was divided, it was done in the name of Aridaeus, as Roxana's child hadn't been born yet. Though the division was officially in the king's name, Perdiccas was the one truly in charge. Many believed his strategy in assigning provinces was to send the other generals far away from Babylon, giving them tasks that would prevent them from interfering with his plans to seize ultimate power. After stabilizing the empire through the division of power, Perdiccas began considering ways to expand his influence further. A crucial decision he faced was his choice of marriage. Both Olympias and Antipater offered their daughters as potential brides. Olympias proposed her daughter Cleopatra, a widow of an Epirus king who lived in Syria, while Antipater put forward his daughter Nicaea. Several of Perdiccas' advisors suggested that marrying Cleopatra, Alexander the Great's sister, would strengthen his position by aligning him with Alexander's family and securing Olympias' support. Perdiccas found this proposition appealing and sent gifts to Cleopatra through a messenger, leading both Cleopatra and Olympias to believe the marriage was settled. However, Antipater acted quickly and sent Nicaea directly to Babylon, where Perdiccas was. Nicaea's arrival made Perdiccas reconsider. While Olympias had a famous name, she didn't hold any real power. On the other hand, Antipater controlled a vast and wealthy region, commanded a large and well-trained army, and was a capable leader despite his age. Realizing that Antipater's support would be more beneficial, Perdiccas decided to marry Nicaea instead. This decision infuriated Olympias, who already hated Antipater and now felt completely betrayed. Olympias was debating with her close circle.
As always, I find little reason to be surprised. The gods have blessed our men with warrior spirits, intellect, courage, and many other qualities, yet they seem to have stripped them of their resolve. After my son's untimely death, it is all too clear what kind of characters those eyeing his throne at the first opportunity truly possess. We must bring order to this chaos as swiftly as possible, or the entire empire will face the looming threat of collapse.
Around the same time, another marriage issue arose, causing more problems. Cinane, a daughter of Philip of Macedon and half-sister to Alexander the Great, wanted her daughter Ada to marry Aridaeus. At the time, Philip and Roxana, along with her child, were under Perdiccas' guardianship. Cinane set out from Macedon with her daughter to arrange the marriage, a bold move because Perdiccas was likely to oppose it, especially as Philip marrying a Macedonian princess would challenge his control. When Perdiccas learned of Cinane's movements, he was enraged by her boldness and sent messengers to intercept and kill her on the way. However, news of this plot sparked outrage throughout the Macedonian army. The soldiers held such deep loyalty to Alexander's family that they refused to allow harm to come to any of its members. Terrified by the uproar he had caused, Perdiccas quickly reversed his orders to the assassins. To make amends and calm the situation, he welcomed Ada to Babylon with apparent warmth and agreed to her marriage to Aridaeus. The wedding took place and the army's anger subsided. Ada took the name Eurydice at this time and would later become a significant historical figure under this name. While these events were unfolding, various plots and conflicts were happening among the governors of different provinces in Europe and Asia. Since these didn't directly affect Epirus, we don't need to go into detail here. During this time, Perdiccas was working to expand his power and take control of the entire empire, while Antipater in Macedon and Ptolemy in Egypt were secretly communicating, trying to find ways to stop him. This situation was a common example of distant provinces uniting against central power. For a while, both sides relied on political maneuvering rather than open conflict. Antipater was reluctant to wage war against Perdiccas, given that Perdiccas was his son-in-law through marriage to Nicaea. Yet as tensions escalated, Perdiccas chose to divorce Nicaea and pursue marriage with Cleopatra instead. Upon hearing this news, Antipater immediately began preparing for war. Antipater summoned his commanders to the war council and addressed them.
Some generals, no matter how old they grow or how many battles they win, still think of war as a game. At this moment, in the playground we now call Asia Minor, a child appears to have drawn his swords against us. Everyone knows I married my daughter to him in an attempt to maintain good relations. But it's clear now that someone who couldn't even rule a village with competence has been utterly poisoned by the power he's been given. To correct a grave mistake, we must send this whining little child to the next world. Begin preparations immediately and waste no time.
The conflict began with a two-pronged attack. Perdiccas raised an army and taking Philip Aridaeus, Eurydice, Roxana and her child with him, marched to Egypt to fight Ptolemy. Meanwhile, Antipater and Craterus led a large Macedonian army across the Hellespont into Asia Minor, planning to attack Perdiccas in Babylon. Perdiccas, in response, sent a large force under the command of a skilled general to confront Antipater and Craterus in Asia Minor, while he focused on his Egyptian campaign. The outcome of the conflict was disastrous for Perdiccas. Antipater advanced successfully through Asia Minor, although Craterus was killed in one of the battles. Despite Craterus's death, his forces won the battle, meaning Perdiccas lost ground in that region. Perdiccas's campaign in Egypt was even worse. As he approached Egypt, his soldiers were reluctant to fight Ptolemy, a respected general known for governing Egypt with wisdom, fairness, and moderation. Perdiccas responded to their hesitation with arrogance, calling his soldiers rebels and threatening to punish them. This only fueled their anger, and soon their quiet grumbling turned into loud complaints. They reminded him that he wasn't their king, just the tutor to their kings, and they refused to tolerate his attitude. Realizing how serious the situation had become, Perdiccas changed his approach and tried to calm the troops. He eventually restored some order, and they proceeded into Egypt. Once there, Perdiccas crossed a branch of the Nile and led his troops to attack Ptolemy, who had fortified himself in a stronghold. Although Perdiccas's army was much larger, they fought without enthusiasm, while Ptolemy's forces were highly motivated by their loyalty to him. Perdiccas was defeated, and his army was severely weakened. He decided to retreat across the river. As his troops began crossing back, they discovered that the water had become too deep to pass after about half the army had crossed. At first, this was a mystery because the water level along the shore hadn't changed. Eventually, they realized that the sand at the riverbed had been churned up by the soldiers and horses, allowing the current to wash it away, making the water too deep to ford. This left Perdiccas in a terrible position. Half his army was trapped on one side of the river, while the other half, along with himself, remained on the opposite side. Perdiccas was deeply alarmed by the dangerous situation he was in and tried several ways to fix the problem. However, all his efforts failed. Realizing that he had to reunite the two halves of his army, he ordered those who had already crossed the river to come back, no matter the risk. Many soldiers tried, but countless men went too deep into the water, were swept away by the current, and drowned. Tragically, about 2,000 men were lost, with many of their bodies being attacked by crocodiles in the river. The soldiers had begun organizing among themselves.
How much longer will we follow this fool? A commander who doesn't even know how to cross a river. What can he possibly conquer? I still can't believe he was one of our great king's generals. Did he learn nothing from him? Or has his overwhelming arrogance made him forget everything he once knew? I'm considering switching sides. After all, this is a civil war, and the opposing armies are technically still ours. It's not like I'd be joining the Persians, right?
In military operations, success determines how soldiers feel about their leaders. So, after this disaster, the dissatisfaction in Perdiccas's camp grew worse. The soldiers mutinied, led by the officers themselves. About 100 of them switched sides, joining Ptolemy and taking a large part of the army with them. The troops who stayed with Perdiccas had no intention of defending him. They wanted to kill him. A group of horsemen surrounded his tent, trapping him inside. Then several soldiers stormed in and killed Perdiccas as he panicked and tried to escape. After Perdiccas's death, Ptolemy came to his camp and was greeted with cheers. The entire army quickly submitted to him. An agreement was made to send the army and the royal family back to Babylon. Python, one of Perdiccas's generals, took command of the troops and the care of the royal family on the journey back. Meanwhile, Antipater had successfully defeated the forces Perdiccas had sent against him and crossed into Asia. A new council of generals was held, and a fresh division of power was arranged. Under this new plan, Antipater kept his command over Macedon and Greece and was given custody of the kings. With everything settled, Antipater returned to Macedon with Philip Aridaeus, Eurydice, Roxana, and the infant Alexander. The elderly Antipater, now about 80 years old, was welcomed home with great honor and applause. His accomplishments made him a hero to the Macedonians. He had led a successful military campaign in Asia, brought back the royal family of Alexander and been appointed as the guardian of these royal heirs and regent of the empire. This elevated him to the highest position of power in the world at that time, and the Macedonians celebrated his return with loud and enthusiastic praise.
Hello. If you enjoyed our audiobook, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I need your support to bring more audiobooks to you. Thank you in advance for your support.
Chapter 2. Olympias returns. Despite returning to Macedon with great honors and complete authority, Antipater faced a challenging situation. He had two formidable opponents, Olympias and Eurydice, who not only clashed with him regularly, but harbored an even deeper hatred for each other than they did for him. Olympias resided in Epirus at the time, deliberately keeping her distance from Macedon to avoid Antipater's authority. Despite this physical separation, she persistently undermined him through various schemes and plots. Her intense hatred for Antipater had grown even stronger after he had foiled her attempt to arrange a marriage between her daughter Cleopatra and Perdiccas, instead offering his daughter Nicaea as a bride. Even though both Nicaea and Perdiccas were now deceased, Olympias remained unforgiving of this interference. Olympias swore vengeance every morning for the betrayal she had endured.
By the heavens and the earth, by all the gods, the stars, the sun, and the moon, I swear I will bring an end to those who have betrayed me. Whether by day or by night, in spring or in winter, I will remain ever vigilant and act with wisdom. I will not allow my son's legacy to be devoured by a flock of vultures. This legacy was built with him, and it will be preserved with him. He will continue to live as the great king who watches over his mother's triumphs from the heavens above.
Eurydice, however, was an even bigger problem for Antipater than Olympias. She had a strong, bold personality and had been raised by her mother, Sinane, to be skilled in military activities like archery, throwing javelins, and leading troops on horseback. After marrying King Philip Aridaeus, she immediately started acting as if she had the right to rule, believing that, as the king's wife, she should have more authority than the generals, who she saw as mere advisors or servants of the king. During the campaign in Egypt, Perdiccas struggled to control her, and after his death, she became even more defiant. She constantly clashed with Python, the commander of the army on the way back from Egypt, and fiercely opposed Antipater's appointment as the guardian of the kings. During a meeting with her supporters, Eurydice confidently declared,
"The rules of imperial succession are simple enough to learn from any history book in the library. Philip Aridaeus must rule alone. The others have already claimed their portions of this empire's bounty. As my mother warned me, in the Games of Thrones, it is better to be the one who desires power madly than the one who merely appears wise. We must accelerate our efforts and seize control as quickly as possible. Otherwise, no matter how long we toil, reuniting a fragmented empire will be beyond our reach."
The meeting to appoint Antipater took place in Triparadisus, Syria, where his forces from Asia Minor joined the army returning from Egypt. A grand council convened immediately after the armies united. Eurydice fiercely opposed Antipater's appointment, and when he reprimanded her behavior, her anger only intensified. Following his appointment, Eurydice publicly denounced him before the army, accusing him of misconduct and calling for the soldiers to revolt. Though Antipater attempted to defend himself calmly, Eurydice's impassioned speech stirred the soldiers into a dangerous riot that almost claimed his life. Only the intervention of several other generals who risked their own lives to protect him saved Antipater from the enraged troops. The tension from the confrontation gradually settled down, and since the generals stuck to their decision, Eurydice had no choice but to accept it. Although she caused temporary disruptions, she had no real power. Like many people with her personality, when she realized that her stubbornness wouldn't change things, she reluctantly went along with the decision, though in a sulky manner. This was the state of affairs between Antipater and Eurydice when Antipater returned to Macedon. However, Antipater's anticipated challenges from Olympias and Eurydice proved short-lived, at least for him. Soon after his return to Macedon, he fell gravely ill. Due to his advanced age, it became evident that recovery was impossible. Accepting his fate, Antipater began preparations to transfer his power. When Craterus returned to Macedon from Asia after Alexander's death, he brought a general named Polysperchon with him. Although Polysperchon was technically second in command, he had led the army during the journey because Craterus was ill. Later, when Antipater and Craterus went to Asia to fight Perdiccas, Polysperchon was left in charge of Macedon as regent until Antipater returned. Antipater had a son, Cassander, who expected to be given control of the kingdom in his father's absence. However, for reasons unknown, Antipater chose Polysperchon over Cassander to govern Macedon. Polysperchon had gained experience in governing, developed a deep understanding of Macedonian affairs, and ruled effectively. The people had grown accustomed to his leadership. For these reasons, Antipater decided that after his death, it would be better to leave Polysperchon in charge rather than replace him with Cassander. While Antipater gave Cassander a high-ranking military position, he passed the kingdom to Polysperchon. Although Cassander never forgave his father for this decision, it earned Antipater even more respect. People admired him for putting the good of the kingdom ahead of his own family's advancement, something few rulers had ever done. On his deathbed, Antipater gave Polysperchon several pieces of advice, including a stern warning about allowing women to influence public affairs. He believed women were governed primarily by emotions and impulses rather than the reason and self-control needed for statecraft. Though he expressed this view in general terms, his warning clearly targeted Olympias and Eurydice, two formidable women who had proven difficult to control and would likely become even more challenging after his death. Despite this advice, Polysperchon paid little attention to Antipater's warnings. One of his first actions after Antipater's death was to invite Olympias to return to Macedon from Epirus. He made this decision after consulting with a grand council to discuss the state of the government. Polysperchon believed that bringing Olympias back would strengthen his position, as she was highly respected by the people, not for her personal qualities, but because she was Alexander the Great's mother. Polysperchon believed her support and the prestige of her name would strengthen his position. Meanwhile, he deliberately sidelined Cassander and other members of Antipater's family, viewing them as potential threats to his authority. Cassander, a bold and ambitious man, quietly observed Polysperchon's actions while staying at his court. He carefully considered what steps to take. Eventually, Cassander decided to act. He organized a small group of his friends for what he called a hunting trip. Once they were far from Polysperchon's court, Cassander revealed his true plan. He intended to overthrow Polysperchon, claiming that the throne of Macedon rightfully belonged to him as Antipater's son and heir. He invited his friends to join him in the effort to depose Polysperchon and take the crown for himself. Cassander addressed his most trusted friends.
There are still many things about my father that I do not fully understand. However, there is one thing I know for certain. My father absolutely did not want Olympias involved in Macedonian politics or public affairs. Even while Alexander was alive, conquering the world, his mother never left my father in peace, filling his time with countless fantasies and distractions. Now Polysperchon, who has unjustly seized control, has pushed aside my father's family and placed this madwoman in charge. This is an unacceptable situation. I have called you here because I trust you will support me on this journey to claim the throne.
Cassander persuaded his friends to join him by making convincing arguments. He told them that supporting his plan was the only way to ensure their safety. As they had all been close to Antipater, Olympias, who Polysperchon was now bringing into power, hated Antipater and would undoubtedly show hostility toward anyone associated with him. Cassander also believed that the Asian princes and generals, who had been loyal to Antipater, would support him in claiming his rightful place. He was confident that Philip, Aridaeus, and Eurydice would back him as well, since they had much to fear from Olympias and would naturally oppose Polysperchon. Cassander's friends quickly agreed, and his predictions proved accurate. The Asian princes provided him with strong support in his effort to overthrow Polysperchon. While Olympias sided with Polysperchon, Eurydice supported Cassander. A fierce conflict erupted, with battles taking place in Greece and other regions. The fighting went back and forth, with victories on both sides. However, the details of these battles are less important to the story, as they didn't directly impact the main figures involved until the conflict moved closer to Macedon. Initially, Olympias hesitated to accept Polysperchon's invitation to return to Macedon. She sought counsel from her friends, but they too were uncertain. Having made numerous enemies during her previous time in Macedon, she recognized the dangers of returning. Moreover, she doubted the stability of Polysperchon's rule. Though Antipater had named him successor, there was no guarantee the people would accept his authority. As a result, Olympias chose to bide her time and observe how the situation developed. From her position in Epirus, she kept in close contact with Polysperchon regarding matters of state, while anxiously watching the war unfold between him and Cassander in Greece. Cassander proved superior to Polysperchon in Greece. Supported by substantial armies from his Asian allies, he demonstrated such skill and bravery that Polysperchon could not expel him. During this campaign, a remarkable incident illustrated the warfare methods of the era. In the Peloponnesian city of Megalopolis, which had pledged loyalty to Cassander, the citizens defied Polysperchon's demand for surrender by retreating behind their city walls with all their possessions. In response, Polysperchon besieged the city. While launching attacks on multiple fronts to distract the defenders, Polysperchon secretly employed sappers to undermine part of the city's wall. These sappers dug a tunnel beneath the wall's foundation and supported it with wooden beams. Once the excavation was complete, they removed the beams, causing the wall to collapse without warning. The tactic proved successful. 3 towers and the connecting wall came crashing down, creating a massive breach in the defenses. The city's defenders surged to the breach to block the enemy's advance, while Polysperchon's soldiers charged forward to storm through. A fierce battle erupted as both sides clashed. Behind the fighting, the city's women and children hastily constructed new defenses behind the breached wall. Though the defenders successfully repelled Polysperchon's troops, their initial relief vanished when word spread that he planned to send war elephants through the breach. These massive beasts, while common in Asian warfare, were virtually unknown in Greece. The people of Megalopolis were terrified, having no experience in defending against such creatures. Fortunately, a soldier named Damides, who had fought with Alexander the Great in Asia, was in the city. He approached the city's leaders and offered his help. Damides said,
"Don't worry. Just continue your preparations and leave the elephants to me. I know how to handle them if you follow my plan."
The leaders agreed, and Damides had iron spikes made and attached to short wooden stakes. These stakes were then planted around the breach and covered with straw to hide the spikes, creating a hidden defense against the elephants. When the elephants advanced through the breach, Damides' plan worked perfectly. They stepped on the hidden spikes and were severely wounded. Chaos erupted as some elephants collapsed where they stood, while others, panicked and in pain, turned back and trampled their handlers. The breach became blocked with fallen men and elephants, forcing Polysperchon's forces to retreat. Shortly after this failed assault, he abandoned the siege entirely and withdrew from the city. Ultimately, Cassander's side won the struggle in Greece, and Polysperchon decided to return to Macedon. Chapter 3: The End of a Dynasty. Meanwhile, Olympias decided to return to Macedon to aid Polysperchon in his fight against Cassander. She departed Epirus with a small army provided by her brother, King Alexander of Epirus, and joined forces with Polysperchon. This move alarmed Eurydice, who viewed Olympias as her primary rival and recognized that her power, along with her husband's, would be threatened if Olympias gained control. Eurydice responded by rallying her supporters to arms. After gathering a considerable force, she took command and dispatched messengers in 2 directions: to Cassander, urging him to join her cause, and to Polysperchon, demanding he surrender his army to Cassander in King Philip Aridaeus's name. Though she held no illusions about Polysperchon's compliance, she nevertheless prepared for battle. Eurydice's plans, however, unraveled dramatically. When the 2 armies converged, her soldiers were struck by an unexpected sight: Olympias herself. As the former queen approached in her royal chariot alongside Polysperchon's army, she carried herself with regal dignity. The soldiers, who had long venerated Olympias as King Philip's wife and Alexander's mother, were so moved by her majestic presence that they immediately abandoned Eurydice and joined Polysperchon's ranks without a single blow being struck. Olympias addressed the generals who had joined her cause.
Believe me when I say, I arrived here fueled by oaths of vengeance, sworn every morning, noon, and night. I wanted the gods to hear my voice more clearly, and I have overwhelmed them with my demands. I have also pleaded countless times with my son, who now dwells among the gods, and I have convinced him at last to heed his mother's words. Now together we march to cleanse this land of thieves, sycophants, and opportunists. I am certain your great king watches you from beyond the clouds and smiles upon you, for he would never wish harm to come to his mother.
Polysperchon captured Eurydice and her husband, Philip Aridaeus. Olympias, triumphant at finally having her rival in her power, imprisoned them in a cramped dungeon where they could barely move. Their only sustenance was coarse food pushed through a hole in the wall. With Eurydice secured, Olympias turned her vengeance toward Antipater's family. While Cassander advanced through Thessaly with a powerful army, his brother Nicanor remained in Macedon. Olympias seized Nicanor and ordered his execution, along with about 100 of his relatives and supporters. In her extreme fury, she even had another of Antipater's sons' remains exhumed and cast into the street. Those around Olympias attempted to halt her cruel actions, but their protests only fueled her rage. She ordered Philip Aridaeus executed by stabbing. She then sent an executioner to Eurydice with 3 options for death: a dagger, a rope, or a cup of poison. Eurydice responded,
I pray to the gods above and the spirits of my ancestors that Olympias shall one day be presented with these same cruel choices, and may she then understand the weight of her tyranny. Let her final moments be filled with the same bitter contemplation she has forced upon others.
She then tore her dress into strips to tend to her husband's wounds. After this final act of devotion, Eurydice spurned all 3 methods of execution and instead used a strip of her clothing to strangle herself. News of these atrocities reached Cassander as he advanced from Greece toward Macedon. When he encountered a large army guarding the pass of Thermopylae, he devised a clever solution. Rather than engage in battle, he gathered every available vessel, transported his army by sea around the pass, and landed in Thessaly. From there, he continued his march into Macedon. While Cassander advanced, Polysperchon and Olympias prepared diligently for his arrival. Olympias, accompanied by Roxana and the young Alexander, now about 5 years old, journeyed across Macedon, rallying support, recruiting soldiers, and gathering supplies. She also appealed to Aeacides, the king of Epirus and father of Pyrrhus, for assistance. Meanwhile, Polysperchon worked independently to fortify his position against Cassander. Such was the state of affairs when Cassander entered Macedon. Cassander split his army in 2. One force, led by a capable general, engaged Polysperchon, while Cassander himself pursued Olympias. Realizing her troops were too few for open battle, Olympias retreated to Pydna, a coastal city in southeastern Macedon. She fortified her position there, knowing confrontation would be futile. When Cassander arrived, he found the city too well defended for a direct assault, so he established a complete blockade by land and sea. Cassander was assessing the situation with his advisors.
Being Alexander's mother does not equate to making the right decisions on the battlefield. Unfortunately for her, even the gods she believes in have led her to a grave. She won't last much longer. Cities, armies, or wealth, none of these matter right now. The only thing that truly matters is ensuring one person does not escape this siege. Olympias. All our focus must be directed toward this, because, given the first opportunity, she will break through the blockade and seek refuge with another ally.
Pydna was ill-prepared for a prolonged siege, and its inhabitants soon began suffering from food shortages. Olympias urged them to persevere, revealing that she had requested aid from Epirus and that King Aeacides was approaching with reinforcements. Though this was true, Cassander had learned of the plan. He dispatched troops to block the mountain passes between Epirus and Macedon. preventing Aeacide's forces from reaching Olympias. Aeacide's army attempted to break through the blockades but failed. Many of his officers, who had opposed joining the war from the beginning, mutinied and returned home. They went so far as to depose Aeacides and install another branch of the royal family on the throne. This upheaval led to young Pyrrhus's escape, as his friends spirited him away to safety. While the details of Pyrrhus's escape await telling in the next chapter, what matters now is that Aeacide's failed rescue attempt left Olympias trapped inside Pydna, with only the city walls between her and Cassander. Inside the city, conditions had become dire due to a lack of food. Olympias, Roxana, the young Alexander, and other women of the court were reduced to eating horse meat. The starving soldiers resorted to even more desperate measures, consuming the bodies of their fallen comrades. Reports claimed they were feeding sawdust to the elephants. Many soldiers and citizens, unable to endure these conditions, escaped at night by climbing down the city walls to join Cassander's camp. Yet Olympias refused to surrender, clinging to one final hope. She dispatched a messenger to Polysperchon requesting a rescue ship. Though Cassander intercepted the message, he allowed the messenger to proceed, knowing he could thwart the rescue attempt. When Polysperchon sent the ship, Cassander's forces seized it. With her last chance of escape eliminated, Olympias had no choice but to surrender. Soon after all of Macedon fell under Cassander's control, Antipater's supporters demanded justice for Olympias's execution of his sons and relatives during her brief reign. Though Olympias agreed to face the Macedonian Senate, confident her influence would prevent conviction, Cassander worried the trial might end in her favor. While hesitant to order her execution directly, he remained determined to see her dead. He devised a scheme, secretly urging her to flee to Athens with his promised help. According to rumors, he planned to have her killed during the escape. Olympias, recognizing the trap, refused. Cassander then sent 200 soldiers to execute her. When they entered her prison, the soldiers, many of whom had once revered her as queen, hesitated to carry out the order. For a moment, it seemed no one would deliver the fatal blow. Yet finally, those soldiers whose family members had fallen victim to Olympias's brutality found the resolve to strike, ending her life. Roxana and young Alexander remained imprisoned under Cassander for several years. Ultimately, viewing the boy's claim to the throne as an ongoing threat to his power, Cassander ordered their assassination.